Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Beyond the Broadcast. I'm your host, Jake Braverman, and today I'm joined by a very exciting guest, someone who has one of the coolest jobs in sports, calling New York Knicks basketball on the radio, Pat O'Keefe. Pat, how are you doing today?
Jake, I appreciate that introduction. I'm doing great. It's awesome to be on your show today.
So, for those who may not know you, can you please introduce yourself and your role in sports?
Yeah, sure. I've been a sports media member since 2003 when I got out of college, working a variety of jobs for a variety of networks. Currently, my primary role, as you mentioned, is on the New York Knicks radio broadcast as their primary studio host, as well as a play-by-play announcer for the MSG Radio Network and ESPN New York. I'm also a talk show host on ESPN New York and a play-by-play announcer for ESPN. And outside of broadcasting, I'm a financial professional, a financial representative in wealth management for a New York firm called Strategies for Wealth.
Can you briefly explain how you got into the world of sports and how you got into this profession?
Yeah, sure. Growing up, like so many, I was a sports nut and I played all kinds of sports growing up in Yonkers, New York. And at some point, I wanted to be a professional athlete. But like, 99% of us, once I realized that that wasn't going to happen, I wanted to do something professionally in sports. When I was growing up in the 90s, newspapers were still huge. I mean, I remember taking the subway to high school every single day and reading the New York Post from back to front. In the 90s, the Knicks were the biggest thing in New York City. The Yankees were starting to get good again. The Giants and Jets had some moments. So sports were booming in the 90s. Newspapers were the thing. At that point in time, I probably wanted to be a sports writer or a beat writer. Obviously, the industry has changed over the years, going more electronic. And by the time I got out of college in the early 2000s, there were more opportunities there. And I went to college, graduated from SUNY Brockport with the intention of preparing myself for a career in sports media. And fortunately, it's paid off.
So, you mentioned the Knicks being the biggest thing in New York in the 90s, and it seems like that's now the same thing today. Where does this Knicks team rank in the all-time greatest Knicks teams in your opinion?
Wow. I mean, it's a great question, and it's such a relevant question. This past championship run was magical. I remember just to kind of go off on a little bit of a tangent from your question for a moment. Growing up, my love of sports came from my father, who was as knowledgeable and as big a sports fan as anyone who I ever knew. Huge Knicks fan, but his thing was the Yankees. And I just remember him telling me about all of these, mythical games that he was either at or in most cases watched or listened to when he was growing up as a sports fan. And you and I are speaking about a month and a half after the Knicks won the championship. And, I'm still kind of in the reflection phase of what exactly just happened. And, to think that 10, 20, 30 years from now, I'll be able to share stories, not only of having watched, but having covered and been in the building for especially games 4 and 5 of the NBA Finals. Game 4, which culminated with OG Anunoby's tip-in, will go down as one of the greatest single sporting events in New York sports history, no matter what happens. And then obviously Game 5, when the Knicks capped off that championship and beat the Spurs in San Antonio. And then the celebration that followed afterwards are memories that I'm going to have with me the rest of my life, and I'm really going to cherish. And I get chills talking about it now. As far as where this Knicks team ranks, from a practical standpoint, it's hard to put them at the top right now, only because obviously you had a group of players, a core group that won 2 championships in 1970 and 1973, led by Walt Clyde Frazier and Willis Reed. And, other than this current group of Knicks, the greatest collection of players the franchise has ever had. It's hard to put a team that just won a championship above that, but obviously this group's story remains untold. They're still in their primes. I think a lot of times in sports, when you learn how to win, winning becomes a habit. And I'm sure you're going to ask me about what the other teams have done in the offseason to close the gap on the Knicks team. What I will say is this. I think once I'm really excited to see, having gotten this experience of winning under their belts, how this team responds in defending its championship this year.
So you're right. That does lead me into my next question. Of course, the East just got a lot more difficult with the 76ers building what seems to be a super team, adding Jaylen Brown and LeBron James. And do you think that they're the biggest threat to the Knicks to win the Eastern Conference and get back to where they were last year?
I think, well, I'll start by saying this. When LeBron was in the middle of deciding where he was going to go, and, I think we all assumed it was going to be Philly, Cleveland, Miami, or Golden State. The one team from a Knicks perspective, the one team that I was on the record saying I didn't want him to go to was Philadelphia. I felt him going to Philadelphia would form the biggest threat to the Knicks. Are they the biggest threat in the Eastern Conference? I think they are if they all stay healthy. But that's a huge caveat. You have Joel Embiid, who I don't think has played more than 40 games in a season since he won the MVP in 2023. And then you have LeBron James, who, as superhuman as he is 43 years old. And the likelihood of him playing a full season is not 100%. Now, you don't have to play a full regular season. They're going to be in the playoffs. They're probably going to be a top four seed if that team is fully healthy and has learned how to play together, because you have a lot of guys that like to dominate the basketball. Maxey, Jaylen Brown, LeBron, and Joel Embiid. That's four guys who are used to, when they're on the court, if you include Brown from last year with the Celtics, being the focal point of the offense. So they've got to figure that out. I think they will with LeBron James and a very good coach in Nick Nurse. But the biggest thing for Philadelphia is the health of the team. That being said, the NBA continuity and chemistry is such an underrated thing in the NBA, and there is no team that have those two things more than the New York Knicks.
Well, with the Atlantic division, having the Knicks, Celtics, Raptors, who am I missing? Knicks, Celtics, Raptors, Sixers, and the Brooklyn Nets. But that's four teams that legitimately could make a run here, especially if the Kawhi trade goes through with the Raptors. How does that division even how does that even go into the playoffs having four teams that could legitimately make a run, in your opinion?
I mean, I look at it more like conference wide. Divisions have been the only, I guess, thing about a division is you play each team in your division four times. Some teams in other divisions in your conference you play three times. Other than that, I don't think the fact that they're in the same division is that big of a deal. They'll all be in the playoffs. They might even be the top four seeds in the playoffs. You have Indiana, which is going to be very good. You have Detroit, which won 60 games last year, and I don't think has done a ton to improve themselves, but they're still going to be a formidable team. And you have Cleveland, which went to the conference finals last year. That's seven teams. So think about that. The four teams that you mentioned in the Atlantic Division, plus those other three teams, that's seven teams. So right off the bat, a minimum of one of those teams is going to have to go through the play-in tournament. We haven't even mentioned Miami, which has Giannis and Bam Adebayo. Not a lot of outside shooting, which is why I didn't mention them. We didn't mention a team like Charlotte, which was just starting to come into its own last year as a real offensive threat. We didn't mention a team like Orlando, which has a lot of talent but was disappointing last year. So it's funny. If I look at it more conference wide as far as, what the Knicks have to go through. Top to bottom, I think it would be a tough argument to make that the Eastern Conference is not the better conference than the Western Conference right now. Now, the Western Conference has those top two teams, Oklahoma City and San Antonio, that I think in most people's opinion, especially outside of New York, are still the best two teams in the NBA. But if you go top to bottom, just in terms of depth of quality basketball teams, I think the Eastern Conference is better than the West right now.
Do you think that there's a sleeper team that nobody's talking about?
In the NBA or in the East?
Either. I was thinking more the East, but the West as
That's a
well.
good question. Well, I just named like what 10 of the teams in the NBA in the Eastern Conference. I think it's Charlotte would be one. I guess I think Orlando. I would say because they were supposed to be good last year and they took a step back. And they brought in a new head coach, Sean Sweeney, who's a longtime assistant coach in the NBA. He was the top assistant for the Spurs this past season. I think that team was missing something in terms of culture and execution last year. And the talent is there. I think a lot of times when you have the talent there, but there's just, something missing, I think a coaching change could fit the bill. I mean, would you consider the Pacers a sleeper? I wouldn't. They went to the finals 2 years ago. Obviously the Knicks, and no team that LeBron James is on is a sleeper. So there's not a lot of sleeper options. If I'm going to give you one, I'm going to give you the Orlando Magic.
That would have been what I've said as well. I do want to circle a little bit more back towards the broadcasting realm of your career. You mentioned OG Anunoby's tip in Game 4. Is that the most memorable moment you've called or the most memorable moment you've experienced?
So experienced, it's a great question. The NBA Finals this year, I was our studio host. So I was doing the pregame, the halftime, and the postgame show. So I didn't call the tip-in. I wasn't on the play-by-play that night. I call about a third of the games throughout the course of the season on the Knicks radio broadcast. Just as far as like pure excitement of being in the building, what did I just witness? Yes, that's like the greatest thing I think I've ever seen in person, and it's going to be very difficult to top. But for me personally, to answer your question, my most memorable call was in Game 2 of the Knicks Sixers first round series 2 years ago in 2024, when the Knicks were on their way to what was going to be a disappointing loss, and they were down by 5 with about a minute to go. And they had that frantic late game comeback where Brunson hit a 3 in the corner, and then the Knicks stole the inbound pass from Maxey. DiVincenzo missed a 3-pointer. Hartenstein grabbed the offensive rebound, kicked it out to Anunoby, who found DiVincenzo again, who knocked down the go-ahead 3-pointer. I was fortunate enough to be on the call for that one with my partner, Monica McNutt. We had one of her videos that she's become so well known for went viral on that play, mostly because of Monica's facial expressions during the call, which were phenomenal. But just putting myself back in that moment, just so locked in on making the call. There was so much happening at once. It was such a big spot. And then when I finished the call and Monica jumped in with her analysis, I just remember kind of taking a breath and being like, holy cow, like what just happened? It was like I almost like blacked out for a half a second. So that has been my most memorable call of my career. And I would also have to say the greatest experience of my career.
What advice would you give to a young broadcaster that wants to one day get to where you are?
I would say do everything that is available to you on your way up, whether that's in high school, whether that's in college, whether that's just out of college. There's so many different facets of this business. I think one of the things that has led to my success is that when I was in college, whether it was in the classroom, at our campus radio station, or in my internship my senior year, I learned how to do so many different things in the business. I was a writer. I learned how to operate the camera. I learned how to edit video. Obviously, I practiced and perfected anchoring and reporting and writing stories and packages and doing play by play. There were so many, and I've done all of those professionally. I was in local news for, I think, 15 or 16 years. That was a big part of my career. The most satisfying part of my career is my play-by-play work. So I was always continuing to prepare for that. But even if it's not like something you 100% think you want to do, I think just getting the experience of working and broadcasting and being a part of live sports and live broadcasts, and there's so many more opportunities from what I can see for young broadcasters coming up than there were in my time. Technology has made that possible. Now, the other part of that is there's more opportunities, but there's also more people going for those opportunities. It's obviously, as you said, it's at the beginning when you introduced me, I do have one of the most fun jobs. And I recognize that, and I'm lucky, which means a lot of people kind of want to get into this line of work. So there's a lot more competition for those opportunities, but there are a lot more opportunities. So I would say try to perfect your craft in as many areas in broadcasting as you possibly can.
I appreciate that advice. And every episode I end with this question, and I've gotten all sorts of different answers from all my different guests. But I'm going to ask you, what is your definition of success?
Um, my definition of success, I would say identify a goal and work hard to achieve that goal. There are a few things in life more satisfying than that. And then to kind of take it forward, find something as your profession or your vocation or whatever it ends up being that you love to do. And if you're lucky enough to do that, make sure that you have a good work-life balance. So I think find something that you love to do, balance it out with a good work-life balance. That's my definition of success.
Well, Pat, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show today. It was very awesome hearing about your journey in sports broadcasting, what it's like being behind the microphone for the Knicks, and also getting your thoughts on the NBA. Thank you so much for joining me. We wish you nothing but continued success moving forward. For those listening at home, thank you for watching this episode of Beyond the Broadcast. If you enjoyed, make sure to like and subscribe both on Instagram and YouTube, and we'll see you next time.